All right, let's get rolling. So, one of the things we're going to do tonight is kind of an overview of what this virtual PLC experience will be over the next 8 weeks. We're going to get oriented to the different technology tools that we'll be using, since the notion of working together in a virtual space like this is usually a little bit new, and there are some norms and resources that we want to share with you. And then before we get too far along, we're really going to start digging into the work itself, which is really thinking about standards and curriculum and assignments and our students. So we'll begin with some quick introductions and then a little bit of an orientation to Zoom. So first, I know you probably mostly know each other, but I want to ask David and Norris to introduce themselves, as they are our wonderful co-facilitators for this experience. So David, Maurice, jump right in. Tell us who you are, what your role is, and we'll go from there.
All right, so Nerissa Aguayo, I am the elementary curriculum, social studies, and electives. I'm still getting used to that title. And what else do we want to share?
That'll do for now.
And my name is David. I think I know everyone now through one way or another, but instructional technology facilitator. And my role has changed, PD and then IT in different departments. But right now I'm really excited to help support the work that we did last year and continue it on with LDC. So I'm here if you need me.
And the wonderful thing is that David and Norris went through this coach certification journey themselves last year. And so they are now transitioning kind of from learners to leaders, which is language you'll be very familiar with soon. We use that a lot. And they've really stepped in to co-facilitate this experience with me. We're really excited about that. So of course, another important person in the room is Seth, who is really shepherding this work along and making this project possible. So Seth, are there any words of welcome you'd like to say to the group?
Hi, everyone. Welcome aboard. Excited. Saw some of you throughout the day today, so it's good to see you again. And, Amanda, Alejandra, Anna, and Susie, thanks so much for joining us this second week of school. I hope the first week got off to a great start. And I guess later on we'll talk about some like timesheet type stuff, and talk about stipends and that kind of thing. But I'm just super excited and proud of David and Norris and all the work that they put in last year. So excited to learn this year.
All right. So to kick us off, we are going to kind of combine two things into one, because we're educators and we like to be efficient. We're going to combine introductions and a little bit of an orientation to Zoom, which is the platform we're using to meet right now. So there are a couple of features of Zoom that I want to point out to you right away to make it easy and comfortable for you to navigate within this platform. The first is that you'll notice that your name might appear under your picture in various ways, depending on how you set up your account. So for some of you, we have last names. For some of you, we have initials. Some of you, first names. So the first thing I'd like to invite everybody to do is to rename themselves so that we all have our kind of first names, or whatever you prefer to be called, displayed prominently. So you can do that simply by clicking where your name shows. And you will notice that one of the options in the drop-down menu that appears is rename. So I'd like to invite everybody now to go ahead and click on your name, select rename, and put in your first name or whatever you'd like for the group to use to refer to you during this time together. Awesome. Okay. So the next thing I want to point out is the chat. So we will use in this meeting space both chat and verbal participation to interact with one another. There'll be times when we really invite you to unmute your microphones, jump into the conversation, talk to each other, especially since we have a pretty nice small group here. But there will be other times when we ask you to put some thoughts in the chat, or it's also available to you throughout the meeting to, add thoughts in as kind of a back channel or ask questions and things like that. So if you're not seeing a chat window already, along the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see, a little kind of message bubble. And if you click that, it will open up the chat window for you. And the default on that chat window is to chat to everybody. So you'll see there's a little blue bubble that says everyone. You can also see that that's a drop-down menu where you can select individual people to do a private chat. And every now and then we'll give you partners and ask you to use that private chat function. But for now, to begin our introductions, go ahead and leave it on everybody so that your chat is going to the whole group. And we would love to hear, by way of an introduction, something positive, some kind of win from your first week of school. So take a moment to go into the chat window, make sure it's set to everyone, and just share one thing that went well or was a win from your first week of school. I love that, Nori. Sometimes those little wins are the big wins. Look at Anna starting her module already. Yes. Ooh, Amanda, I'm going to ask you later what text it is. I want to know what they're excited to read. Beautiful. New blueprints. Congratulations, Sonia. That's awesome. All right. So as you're getting your thoughts posted into the chat, we're going to use that as kind of a springboard to our verbal introductions. So this will be a chance to kind of practice seeing everybody on gallery view and also just muting and unmuting your microphones. So most of you already kind of intuitively went into mute mode on your microphones. That's pretty smart just because of background noise and feedback. When you're not talking, it's easiest to just leave your microphone muted, but you are always encouraged to unmute and jump into the conversation at any time. So a couple of things I want to point out again in Zoom. If you're not already in gallery view, which is the Brady Bunch style we call it, allows you to see everybody on the screen at once. Find that icon in the upper right corner of your Zoom screen that looks like a little grid. If you hover over it, it'll say gallery view. Go ahead and click that. And that should enable you to see the whole group at once, which really helps foster conversation rather than, people getting pushed off the screen in speaker view. So if you're not there, go ahead and get into gallery view. And then unfortunately, one of the quirks of Zoom that we have never been able to figure out the logic of is that we all appear in different orders on one another's screen. So you may be in the upper right hand of my gallery view and the lower left of somebody else's. I only say that because what I'm going to do now is just go in the order that I see you on my screen and ask you to briefly introduce yourself. So what I'll ask you to do is just tell us your name, where you work, what's your role, and if you'd like to share or elaborate on your win from the first week of school, you can. But mostly we just want to hear your voice, make sure you know how to unmute and get a clear sense of who everybody is in the group. So other than the folks I've already introduced, the first person I see on my screen is Susie. So Susie, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Susie Dreischuff. I'm from Tavares Middle School. I'm the literacy coach at Tavares Middle School, and I'm very excited to be joining you guys and excited about this new learning journey.
Wonderful. Thanks, Susie. All right, next up, I see Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I work at Eastridge High School. I teach 10th grade English, and then I picked up AP Capstone Seminar this year in addition to that. And to kind of expand on my win, I have 2 general classes here, and we're starting with an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Spears, and they are loving it. We started with like a Twilight Tower Terror recap. It was not Tower Terror, it was Twilight Zone. They did a rendition and we only showed them half of it. And then they were so invested, they just can't wait to read the text actually. And it was really cool to see.
That's rad. Thanks, Amanda. All right, next I see Natalie.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I was going to be the one that couldn't figure out the unmute, but I'm the program specialist for 612 Social Studies and Electives. I work in the Curriculum and Instruction and Assessment Department. All
right, thanks, Natalie. All right, next I have Alejandra.
So my name is Alejandra. I'm an 8th grade U.S. history teacher at Eastridge Middle School, and I really enjoyed getting to know my students this past week. They kind of have a different reputation in our school for being kind of a tougher group, and it's been kind of cool seeing some of those walls break throughout the week and then getting them to work today on annotating and then looking for some claims and evidence. They all were just ready to go and wanted to share and talk about it. So it was really cool to see that today.
That's lovely. Thank you. All right, next, Nesa. All right, hold on a sec, Nesa. We can't hear you. And yet I see that you're not muted. So there might be a different technical issue. Do you have, I think we heard you a few minutes ago though, didn't we? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to try muting you and unmuting you just to see what happens. Try again.
Hear me?
There you are. All right.
Hi, I am the program specialist for 612 ELA and reading, and I work for curriculum instruction and assessment.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, next I have Sonia.
Hi, I'm Sonia Blackstone, and I am the program specialist for science, 6th through 12th grade.
Wonderful. And Anna.
All right. My name is Anna. I work at Eastridge High School. I teach chemistry. And kind of to expand on my module since I've started, we're actually talking about the scientific method, which is always our first thing that we talk about. And I really emphasize the importance of the scientific method. And we've been working on it yesterday and today. And today I think it finally clicked that text-based evidence is really important when trying to support scientific arguments. They were all just like, wait a second, no one's told me this before. So it was really awesome to see them be like, what? But they're really excited. Yeah, they're really excited to start reading our text. So I'm stoked.
That is just fabulous. An aha moment so early in the year. Very powerful stuff. Yes, snaps. All right, thanks everybody. So we're going to start to dig in just a couple more minutes of orientation to some of the tools and resources that we're going to be using. And then without further ado, we're going to start thinking about standards, which is really one of the driving reasons that we're here. So last thing about Zoom for the time being, we will continue to explore the things we can do in Zoom. If Zoom is appearing as full screen on your computer right now, one of the things you're going to need to do is exit that full screen view, because we will be toggling back and forth between interacting here in Zoom and doing some looking and thinking at things inside of Core Tools. So if you're in full screen view, you can either bring your mouse over the screen, and again, in the top right corner, there should be a little 4 arrows icon that allows you to switch back and forth between full screen and non-full screen. Or for most people, you can also just hit that handy escape key on your keyboard, and that will bring your window to a smaller place where you can then open other things. So if you're in full screen now, use either one of those methods to get out of full screen, because momentarily I'm going to ask you to open up a few things in a browser window so that we can begin our work together in the Learn tab of Core Tools. But for the time being, exit full screen, but stay here in Zoom, because what I'm going to do is share my screen. That's another thing that we'll do very regularly to kind of walk you through the other things that you're going to need to have open and how you're going to use them during this learning experience. So I'm going to enter share screen mode now. And now you should be seeing your colleagues in a smaller window somewhere on your screen, and then my browser window. So is anybody not seeing my browser window? Let me know at any time if you're not seeing something that it sounds like you should be seeing. So what I have open here are a couple of things. I've got a few additional resources open, but the main thing is I have a browser window with Core Tools open. And what I'm actually going to do now, that sounds a little counterintuitive, but I'll explain why shortly, is open a second browser tab also with Core Tools open. And the reason for that is that we might need to have more than one thing open at a time, and it's much easier to toggle back and forth between tabs than to try to constantly navigate back and forth between two things in the same window. So if you're not super experienced with Core Tools, I'm pretty sure everybody here has an account, has kind of done at least some initial playing around inside of Core Tools. But if you're not familiar with it, there's really 2 key tabs where we're going to be living during this work. One is in the LDC library itself, and this is our publicly available curriculum library. These are the teacher-created modules, very much like what you either have created or are going to be creating during this learning experience. And so having the library open in one window is always handy, because you might be looking for ideas and resources in there. But the really important resource for this virtual PLC is what we call the Learn tab. And so that is just, again, in the gray bar at the top of the screen, the far left tab where it says Learn. That is going to take you to all of the professional learning content that's available on our platform, some of which is publicly available, but a lot of which is only available to you through your license as a district. And so here is where you will find really everything that we need to do our work together during this journey of coach certification. Within the Learn tab, this is kind of a new feature. So those of you who used this last year, you might not have experienced this before. I mentioned earlier the idea of learners and leaders. So we talk a lot about wearing 2 hats, being a learner in the work and thinking about standards and curriculum and task quality and all of that good meaty stuff. And also being a leader in terms of developing your coaching competencies and your ability to support others in doing that same work. So our Learn tab is actually further subdivided into those 2 categories. Under LDC Learner, I don't know if you just saw a tail whip by behind me, but that was my dog running into the room. Under LDC Learner, you will see all of the courses that are available to the teachers that you work with in your buildings, in your district. We will primarily be focusing on these three, the instructional cycle courses, thinking about tasks, thinking about skills, and thinking about instruction. For this first 8 weeks, we're going to live very heavily in instructional cycle 1, standards-driven tasks. We're going to really focus on assignment quality, like most of us got a chance to talk about this summer, is kind of the foundation for everything else. Under LDC Leader, this is where you will find essentially your syllabus and resources for this coach certification process that you're beginning tonight. We will be spending all of our time in these 8 weeks inside of quality tasks. That's what our course essentially is called and what we're meeting to do here every Tuesday night. So within the Learn tab, quality tasks is going to be your home base. It's going to be your guide for everything that we do both during our weekly PLCs and in between, because there will be asynchronous work that you complete between sessions to, develop your task, do a little bit of reading, applying that to your work. It's organized by week, so it should be pretty intuitive and pretty straightforward. And when you open week 1, for example, there's a little bit more front loading in week 1 than you'll see in the other courses because it's an introduction. But really the meat of what you need starts here in a table where you're going to see every week during the PLC and after the PLC. And this is kind of the quick bullet points about what you'll be doing each week, as well as links to the specific resources that you need to do that work. So we'll get into more detail about this later as we get to the end of the session and talk about your next steps and how you can come back here to find the things that you need to do your work between sessions. We just wanted to give you a brief orientation to that. Another thing you'll note is that as you move through the course, it allows you to track your progress, and it allows us to also kind of be able to check in and see where you are in your progress of doing the work. So each week you'll be asked to kind of confirm, like, yes, I was there in the PLC session, or no, I wasn't able to be there, but I watched the recording, just kind of logging your response, as also kind of checking off that you have completed the asynchronous learning steps that were required for that week. And then finally, a little feature that I wanted to share with you, we'll start this beginning next week, is that to kind of wrap up your asynchronous learning between sessions every week, there will be a discussion or a reflection prompt here at the bottom. And what we'll ask you to do is, to put a cap on your work, respond to one of the reflection questions in this space here. And I'm just gonna model how this works for you, right? So I'll just say, this is my reflection, and I'm gonna hit submit. What it then does is it saves my response. And the reason that that's important is that today we began simply by sharing something that was a win from week 1 in your classrooms or in your role. Most weeks we're going to begin by asking you to copy and paste your reflection from here into the chat. So it's a way to launch our conversations by just kind of saying, like, what were you thinking about this week? What were some insights, ahas, or reflections from the work you did on your own to kick off our conversation here together in the synchronous PLCs? So just know that that's there. Again, those instructions will be kind of given back to you in our next steps at the end of tonight, as well as in the follow-up email. But I wanted you to have a quick peek at what that looks like in Core Tools. One thing that you will notice is, let's say that you come here after tonight to do your asynchronous work, and you see that ultimately the last step is that you need to complete IC1 session 2. We'll talk more about what that means. That opens the link for you so that you can go right there. And here is your session 2 that it's asking you to complete. And actually, session 2 is where we're going to be beginning tonight. So let me pause there really briefly. All of this, it might sound like just a lot of random jabbering that I'm doing at you. I understand if that's what it feels like right now, but you'll become very familiar and very comfortable with these platforms as we go through the experience, and we will always be sure to kind of slow down and guide you to where you should be at any given moment. So I'm just going to pause briefly to see if there are any immediate burning questions, And then I am going to hand it over to Norris to actually guide us into some of this course content to begin our work in thinking around standards. So before we move on, any burning questions? All right, so Norris, I'm going to invite you to take it away and guide us into session 2 to do some thinking about standards.
All right. So I'm sharing my screen. If you guys would go ahead and log into Core Tools if you're not in there already. And in a moment, we're going to visit session 2 in instructional cycle 1. But if you'd watch me navigate there, then we'll know where to go. So we'll start off again, like Nicole said, in the Learn tab, and then you will just scroll down to instructional cycle 1. And you're going to see 2 options. One says to adapt to standards-driven tasks, and the other one says to design. Adapt is when you go and you find somebody else's task that they've written, and you just kind of use that. But for the sake of our learning, we're going to be designing. So you'll be selecting the second one, and then we're going to go to session 2. So we're going to review and refresh a bit. What we're going to be doing in a moment is we're going to be reading from the Think and Practice section all the way down through the slides right before you get to selecting a cognitive demand or a template for your task. So if you would actually scroll through the slideshow here, and also if you are ELA, this area right here is relevant to you, so you might want to consider reading that if time allows. So let's just take a moment, and while you're reading that section, and again, basically from selecting your focus standards through the slideshow, while you're reading that standard, I just want you to consider what is the most important section, the most important part there, something that you would really annotate and want to share with others. Any questions? Okay, and I believe somebody just put the question that we're going to be considering in the chat window.
I'm just about to. So one thing you might be noticing that as one of your facilitators is guiding you to do something in the Learn tab, one of us will also be giving you those same instructions in the chat so that you have a visual reference, as well as links to any resources that you need to open. So we'll always try to give you those things in 2 modes to make it as simple as possible to get where you need to go.
Okay, I think we're about done. So if you would go ahead and maybe let's unmute our mics. What are some insights or some ahas that you had about the focus standard clusters based on what you just read?
I like the part where it says one way to think about a focus cluster is to figure out how the standards make each other better. And when I was trying last year really hard to kind of figure out how to incorporate 2 standards, 2 ELA standards with the writing, I think it was Nicole that had said, just kind of, if you're looking at it, it's kind of making one seem a little bit more deeper, I think, or trying to get the deeper answer from the students. So I would highlight that, and I thought that kind of stood out to me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else?
For me, when I was reading this, one of the things that I would highlight was for the students to know the standards and what you want them to focus on for the whole module. A lot of the times I get, why am I doing this? And if they don't know why, they don't want to. But the moment they realize what the standard is and what their goal is, their mind, like there's a, I can't even talk today. There's a mind shift, and they want to do it. They're eager to. So that stood out to me, this like being focused like that.
Very cool. Any other thoughts? So our next step is going to be the selection of our standards. So during our face-to-face session, we took a little bit of time in looking at maybe a time of year that you might want to teach some standards more deeply, somewhere where you just wanted to see student progress, or maybe where you wanted them to really write deeply in response to something that they're learning. So up next, David is going to be speaking a little bit more about those focus standards.
Can everyone hear me okay? Sometimes this unmute kind of gets a little crazy. So one thing that is so interesting to look at is really the entry points with the LDC task. If you can see my screen, there are those 5 entry points to where you can start with some of this work. And most commonly, you're probably going to start off with identifying those focus standards or cluster. And that really helps guide the work as we start to build these modules. And now it's kind of exciting because I wasn't with you during July. I was kind of double booked. I'm really curious to hear what you're thinking about doing for a module, where you're going to start with some of those standards and that cluster. So I want you to tell me, and we're going to post these questions in the chat. I would like to know what grade level you're going to focus on, what discipline or class if you teach different classes, and really what are 3 focus standards that you're going to use to drive the design of your module. So we're going to post those questions in the chat, and then we're going to have a chance to unmute and actually share some of our ideas that we're thinking about. Thanks, Nicole. And she said, if it's okay, if you haven't quite identified that specific standards yet, we're going to get there.
So now is the moment of truth when we need a bold participant to just unmute and dive in. This is an opportunity really just to share your thinking and bounce ideas off your colleagues in the hopes that you'll get, one step closer to knowing what your task is going to be all about, since the work of our time in these 8 sessions together is really to design a very strong standards-driven task. So it's just that kind of initial idea sharing.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. Sorry. Okay, so if so I'd like to focus somewhere in middle school, 6-8 ELA, but let's say I have a teacher who maybe isn't very comfortable or yet with standards aligned instruction. So they really just want to start with the text first. They want to start with the content. Since there are different entry points, but I saw that, like the arrow was pointing kind of with the standards first, like how do we go about that? Like, is that okay or?
Yeah, that's such a great question because there really are genuinely different starting points and entry points for designing a task, right? We really emphasize the focus standards because regardless of where else you start, it's so important for that to be part of the early decision making before you think about like a prompt or a specific assignment. But in many cases, I think especially in ELA, the text itself kind of drives our thinking. And we're going to do something in the second half of the session tonight that really gets at that point. So one of the things that I think will be illustrated in that later activity is the idea that if you're starting with a text, one of the first questions is kind of like, what standard makes sense with this text? Like, what's interesting and important about this text? Is it the figurative language? Is it the structure? Is it the point of view? And from there, then picking the appropriate standard to drive the task prompt that you're going to create.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I have an idea of 6th grade science, and there's a standard that you differentiate between weather and climate. And part of my whole focus this year is on critical thinking and trying to get our students to understand critical thinking and how to get good sources so they know what's true and what's not. So I thought that was a really good standard to go with. If they, it's pretty simple, because you have weather and you have climate. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it just yet, but I think it's a good starting point.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And you're right, like it's a starting point. And so you might find that you're going to try it out and some things might work or might not work. And that's kind of half the fun, seeing what you want out of that module. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. And I'll just highlight too, it's something that I heard Sonia say about it makes sense because that topic invites critical thinking, right? And that's a really great starting point. Like if we're going to be asking students to engage in a hefty assignment about a topic, we want to make sure it's one that requires some reasoning and not just regurgitation of ideas or information. So that's a really smart thing to focus on.
So one thing I was going to say was for the teacher leaders that we have tonight, or literacy coach, think about using this opportunity to design your own module through the coaching work, and don't feel pressure that you have to teach it tomorrow, right? Like ultimately this is about your learning, and then it becomes really nice if you're building something that would work on your campus within your grade level, and ultimately, those are the kind of things we're trying to keep aligned to the curriculum we're actually using in our blueprints. So, just keep that in mind.
Would anybody else like to share kind of like an idea or their starting point?
I can share. Oh, sorry, Alejandra.
You can go and then I'll share. It's fine.
Okay. So my idea was, I teach chemistry, so it's like 11th grade, and a lot of the times they don't know where their laws came from and the history behind those laws. So I wanted to do one with the ideal gas laws. It's probably around quarter 3, just to see how they developed and to use the history and the experiments that they did to kind of tie in how they would see and use those critical thinking skills that Sonia was talking about. So that's my starting point.
That's awesome, and it's probably a good plan to kind of think to the future, to a future point in the school year. So grade grading period 3 is a great starting spot because you know of kind of an area of growth for those students, right? So it's a good place to start. Thanks for sharing. Alejandra?
Sorry, I had to find the unmute button. For me, I want to focus in 8th grade. The Industrial Revolution unit is one that I feel like is overlooked all the time, and we don't have any good primary or secondary sources. So I wanted to pull a couple for them to compare that time period and the impact that it had on the country, and maybe make some connections to the now as well. Because I think for the other quarters, the ones that I was able to work on last year are pretty good if we keep working on them and fixing them. But I want to fill in that gap for that 3rd quarter unit.
Some really good critical thinking, like drawing inferences from one time to another and doing the compare and contrast. That definitely is a lift. So I'm going to use that as a segue to the next part, which is really thinking about how some of these standards work together in what we call like the cluster of standards, and how you can really provide that lift together. So I'm going to ask you if we could share any insights or maybe ahas from what we've read in core tools, or anything that you might have talked about right now or just kind of thought about, but really focusing on kind of that lift, that potential lift that we can bring to some of our students. And Norris also posted this in the chat. So I want to give you a chance to read that question again, but let's think about sharing some ahas with the group about how we can cluster some of these focus standards together.
I'll go. Actually, Norris and I were just talking about this today. So sometimes with our social studies content standards, they kind of leave a little bit to be desired in terms of cognitive complexity or depth of knowledge. So I think something that was an aha to me reading this past text in the course was, and I'm sorry if you can hear the baby screaming in the background, but was adding or looking towards the literacy standards basically to kind of combine those with the content standard to increase that rigor. So that stood out to me.
Thanks for sharing, and that's a huge aha. And I love how you're bringing it, again, the content standards with the literacy and working together in order to create something really good to get kids to the critical thinking. And I think we've had some other discussions at the beginning of the session, kind of the same idea, like you're using literacy in science, or you're using it somewhere else. Like no one's ever said that before. And we're really highlighting that for our students, and it helps when we can make those connections. So great aha, thank you for sharing. Anyone else that want to build on those ideas?
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Natalie mentioned. In my class, the focus standards have completely changed the conversation in the room. It's no longer about just giving me facts. It's about where they're getting their evidence from and how the source is actually building the claim and how it relates to now and that impact. And it just makes, I feel like for me, a better class. And I feel like for the students, it's that why that Anna was saying earlier, like it eliminates that. They know why they're in the room. They know why it's relevant to them. And it's no longer beyond the textbook. It's about what they can grab from the text itself.
Fantastic. And you're so right. Like half of this is really trying to get students to really think critically. And I love like being real with them. Like the purpose behind this is to teach them how to think in some aspects more than just the content. Because if they can analyze a document in one class and then see how to analyze a document in a different discipline, they're going to gain a lot of skills from that. And so that's huge. Thanks for sharing. Any other thoughts or ideas? You guys are on a roll tonight. All right, I know it's the first or second week. So really based on what you are kind of doing or working with your disciplinary expertise, we're gonna have moments where we're gonna work together. And some of these pairings are gonna be really nice. You'll actually work in teams, and so it kind of makes sense if you teach social studies. There are gonna be times where we want you to pair up with someone else that teaches social studies, just so you can bounce off ideas. And then there'll be some other times where we might pair you up with someone different, and it's kind of fun. Last year we had some good conversations where we weren't in the same discipline or maybe different levels, high school talking to elementary. So we'll kind of pair up at certain times, and sometimes we'll work together with our discipline. I'm just kind of curious, have you thought about who you might be able to work with at the school level and kind of bounce some ideas off with your team? If so, if you don't mind just sharing out who you're thinking about with the rest of the group.
I was thinking of probably bringing a little bit more into 10th grade, because 10th grade we need to work on the writing aspect. We noticed that our scores were lower, and it could have just been a mixture of things last year, but we want to be able to use that and then kind of integrate, especially we have new 9th grade teachers, we have to bring them in as well. So we did have 2 and then 1 left. So then now we have 1 new 9th grade teacher that we want to like integrate and bring on board. So I think that's what we're going to work with.
I'm going to be working with the other 8th grade teachers in my department. One of them, it's her first year, not so much in the classroom, but teaching social studies. And then the other teacher, he's kind of a vet. He's been working for 5 years now, and I'm excited for him to use some of the LDC work and to kind of actually bring our work together and see how each of us are doing and teaching the module itself and what we can learn from that student data.
I'm thinking, so the other chemistry teacher at Eastridge is doing LDC also. He's in his first year with us. So I'm working with him, but I also want to bring on our physical science teachers who also teach our same grade level, so mainly juniors, some seniors, and also our freshman class that just came in. They're tough. And so I would kind of want to give them more of a why behind things as opposed to, well, I just have to be at school today. They like being hands-on from what I'm gathering from our environmental science teachers. So I want to see if they're open to maybe putting more writing projects into their curriculum this year.
Awesome. And it's all about teamwork. It's nice that you can work with the team and really bounce off those ideas, because sometimes you get stuck and it's really nice to have that resource. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole for our next section. Here's to Nicole.
Thanks, David. I would love hearing about everybody's ideas for the task. This is such a nice moment when it's kind of the ideating, the brainstorming, figuring out what's going to work, what's going to really provide immediate opportunity for students to do some writing in response to reading, which is what this work is all about, right? So the name of this course, this 8-week session, is quality tasks, and that's what we're going to be focused with laser precision on, right? How do we take these ideas about interesting content or interesting texts and turn them into really powerful, standards-driven literacy tasks within our disciplines? And the key next step for everybody here is going to be to go from kind of the seed of an idea to a solid focus cluster, so that you have selected standards that complement each other, that strengthen and amplify one another to drive the design of that assignment. So for science and social studies, that's going to mean a content standard, a reading standard, and a writing standard. For ELA, that's probably going to look like 2 reading standards that fit well together, plus a writing standard, or maybe like a reading, a language, and a writing. And there's kind of different ways to configure that, since we don't have content standards actually in the same way that the other disciplines do. The reading standards kind of are our content standards. But I think you'll find, and those of you here can probably speak from experience, that the question of like finding the perfect pairing between a reading standard and your content or topic is really an intellectually challenging task. It's an interesting thing. So we're going to really encourage you to play with that. And I want to highlight one thing about the reading standards before you really go into this process, okay? So these are the anchor standards. On the left side, it's the anchor standards for reading, right? And those are kind of like the end point that all of the grade level and discipline specific versions of the reading standards are working towards. They're really handy. A bunch of you have done the standards mental markers with us, like kind of trying to memorize the key idea of each standard. They're really handy to just get that quick feel for like what each standard is about and what direction you might go. As you're developing a focus cluster of standards, what we're going to encourage you to do, whether it's with our L standards, RI for reading informational text, RH for reading and history, RST, there's so many different versions of these standards. Whichever ones you're using, whichever ones are appropriate for you, we're going to ask you to really kind of focus your energy on choosing one from between standard 2 and standard 9. So even though there's 10, we're actually going to kind of push 1 and 10 off to the sides. And some of you may have been in conversations already about the reasons for this. So if you think about standard 1, there's no question that that's a hugely important standard, right? This is one that we work on all the time. But why might it not make a good focus standard for a task or a module? Any thoughts?
Isn't it already embedded in what we're asking them to do?
Yeah, that's the kind of the short answer, right? So R1 is always hardwired into any LDC task prompt, right? If you go to the library and open up any task, it's impossible for it to not say, support your discussion or your argument with evidence from the text, because that is hardwired into the template, right? So like here, you can see it. You're going to see it every single time. So R1 we consider to be an ongoing support standard that's always in play rather than a focus standard. The other thing about R1 is that it doesn't really give you a specific lens for approaching the text. It doesn't really provide guidance around how to grapple with the text in the way that the other standards do, right? If you're using standard 2, you know your focus is on main idea. If you're on standard 3, you know your focus is development of ideas, right? These are different ways of looking at the text and making meaning of them, whereas R1 is more about kind of generally making inferences and finding support and evidence for ideas. And then, of course, there's standard 10, read and comprehend grade level texts. That's the vaguest thing you could possibly imagine, right? That's a benchmark. That's, again, an end goal. It's not a specific way of reading. So what we're looking for are standards that give us a specific way of reading that makes sense for our discipline and the text that we have selected, so that students can develop the content understanding that they need for whatever unit you're working on and make sense of these rich and complex texts that we're trying to put in front of them. So as you're looking at reading standards, you're really going to focus on standards 2 through 9 and thinking about which one is the best fit for the thinking that you want kids doing as they read text and learn content in this module. I want to move on pretty quickly here to kind of wrapping up and next steps, but I also just want to give you a little bit of a preview of something that we're going to do together next week that I'm really excited about. So before we ask you to design your own task, we are going to do a little bit of kind of modeling and practice together around these early decisions that you have to make in designing a task and thinking about, like, I have a general topic or I have a text, but I'm not sure what I want to do with it yet. We're going to be reading together this short historical text, which is the Integrated Bus Suggestions. So this is something that was circulated from the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. right at the time that buses were integrated in Montgomery. And it's a really great example of how you can take a short but very rich text and do a lot of different kinds of things with it. So I would imagine if you're an ELA person, you might be skimming this right now and getting some interesting ideas for what you could do with it, right? Like something maybe about point of view or structure, right? This is, again, a short text, but there's a lot going on. If you're coming at this from a history lens, you might also be looking at this and getting some sparks of ideas for different big concepts or moments in history that you could address through the use of this text in your classroom. If you're science, I don't know what you might be thinking right now, but I'm sure you can put yourself in the shoes of one of the other two disciplines. So what we're going to be doing together is just some thinking around what are all the different directions you could take with this task, with this text, excuse me, and then really getting to those decisions about like what standards would make sense. What cognitive demand in my template would make sense? How can I get to the point where I actually have a coherent task based on this interesting text? So just something to look forward to, I think, in our thinking together. That's going to be a big section of what we do together next week. And it will also be a way to, again, familiarize yourself with some of the choice points in designing a task, as well as like within Core Tools, just the technology aspect of how you end up constructing a task there. And you're lucky to have several kind of experts in this group already. So you've got lots and lots of experience to draw from here. All right. So I'm going to continue sharing my screen, but I am going to go back to our quality tasks kind of syllabus in Core Tools so that you can see what's coming up. So today in our, during our PLC, we focused on some of these things, right? Thinking about our focus standards, thinking about group discussion and collaboration. After tonight, before you come to the next session, you're going to have some next steps to do independently. So I am going to hand it over to Norris to go over your next steps with you. And then I think Seth might have a few words to say about timesheets and logistical things. And then we will end with one very quick final word with as a reflection. So Norris, do you want me to just leave my screen sharing up and you can talk through this?
Yes, that works for me.
Okay,
Okay, so your first assignment after you leave here tonight is going to be pretty much to finish your focus standards. You're going to start finalizing those. I'm sure you've all said some ideas tonight. So you're also going to complete those action items that we spoke about earlier on session 2. And that's going to incorporate the template and the cognitive demand that you'd like to pick for your focus standards. So any questions on that, or where it's located, how to find it? I like this process, how it's incorporated in this quality task, because everything is right there. It tells you exactly what to do. All right, so I'll hand it over to Seth before we do our final word whip.
I had a quick question. I'm sorry,
Sure.
Nori.
Yeah.
So can you tell me again how you got to the action items that's in the Learn tab?
Yes.
So you want me to model that, Norris, real quick?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So also we will send you a link in the follow-up email as you become more familiar with this. But from the Learn tab, you're going to be an LDC leader. We are working on quality tasks, and we're in week 1. And that's where you will find this information about, kind of what happened in the PLC and what you need to do before the next session.
Does that answer your question, Sonia? All right, Seth?
There we go. Thank you. So yeah, as a perfect segue, just kind of want to talk about, so kind of some terms that we throw around sometimes here in the Brady Bunch is like synchronous work. So that's what we're doing right now. And like I told you guys, you get paid $20 an hour for the 1-hour session on Tuesday evenings. But that asynchronous work, the work that you're going to do outside of this 1-hour session, by all means, like when you're sitting there, I'm going to send out timesheets to kind of help keep track of the work that you're doing asynchronously, or kind of that homework, that extra work. And that's $30 an hour, because ultimately it's a writing stipend, because the idea is that you're writing curriculum. And so it's a pretty cool opportunity. Like I said in the email today, it's in my opinion, a great investment. I feel like it's, investing in you ultimately and your own professional growth. And so you'll get paid depending on the hours that you work. Honor system, I'm really trusting that you'll submit hours that you actually did put in, but up to 2 hours per week at that $30 an hour stipend. Okay, so I think that was pretty much all. So when you see, I don't want to bombard your inbox for emails, but when you see anything LDC related logistically, some of that timesheets does get a little hairy. I have to work pretty closely with our finance department to just keep everything going. But I'll handle that and just kind of keep you guys organized as far as that goes. And I definitely want to make sure that you get the most out of this experience. So obviously, Norris, David, and I, and Nicole as well, we're so open to feedback and how this is going for you. We'll follow up with Brittany Wolf from East Ridge Middle School. She's joining us as well in this group, which is really cool. She's teaching one class and then a literacy coach as well. So she's going to be a great value add to this work. And other than that, Nicole, do you think I missed anything logistically?
I think those are the key things. And again, you'll get more familiar with everything in Core Tools and how to use that. But like Seth said, the purpose of the work in between sessions is ultimately to develop that task and of course to simultaneously develop your skills around that. But everything that we ask you to do in the Learn tab is really just meant to be resources to help you in that process, so that it is really a job embedded. You might be doing it at home after hours, but the purpose of it is not just to, read random LDC stuff, but to support you in your thinking about tasks and curriculum. And so we hope that you will find the time to carve out and do that work in between sessions. And just like with class and kids and homework, it also gives us more richness in these conversations when we are together, because the thinking that happens between sessions drives the conversation here and allows us to be resources for one another in improving that work. So I'm just really excited. I think this is a fantastic group, and I can't wait to do more work with you. In the interest of time, we started 2 minutes late. We're going to end 2 minutes late. We'll get right to that exact time soon. But we are going to close as we always do. This is familiar for some of you. We do it in person as well, but tonight we'll do it in the chat with what we call a final word whip. And that is just, what is one thing that you are thinking about as you leave tonight, or one thing that resonated with you from our work together? And that could be a single word or a longer thought, but just something you're thinking about or something that resonated with you as your reflection. And then that's kind of your ticket out the door. We'll stick around for a few minutes for any questions, concerns, conversations you might want to have. But let's take a moment now to get those final word reflections in the chat. Awesome. Thanks for your reflections, everybody. So what we will do after each session takes a couple days to process, but we'll send out a follow-up email that'll have a link to the recording of tonight's session. If there's ever anything you want to revisit, or if you were not able to make it, you'll be able to review the session that way. It'll also have a log of the chat window that only includes the chats to everyone, just FYI, in case you're having any private chat back channel, that will not show up. And then it'll also have a summary of your next steps for next week. I believe that is it. Thank you so much, everybody, for making time on a Tuesday night. Great to work with you. Again, we'll stick around, but if you don't have any questions, we'll see you next week.